Let me take you back to October 1st, 2021, when everyone's favorite daily web-based word game Wordle becomes available to the public.
Wordle? Who named it that? Josh Wardle?
Yeah, actually.
It was later acquired by the New York Times, and they've done a pretty good job of keeping it alive and expanding on it with additional daily puzzle games. But as great as Strands is, and the mini crossword was, and the Connections isn't,
English translations of popular Egyptian hieroglyphics. Misspelled.
You'll notice that they all share a fatal flaw. None of them end with dull. Now, this is clearly a matter of great import, considering that the internet seems to have collectively agreed that any type of more or less trivia-based web game that resets on a daily basis, which is apparently a genre of thing that exists on the internet now, needs to follow this naming convention.
And let me tell you, there's a lot of these dulls out there, ranging from an insult to you and the time that you take to even open the website, all the way to this is binary cocaine that you can inject straight into your autistic brain. So, I'm gonna review all of them, at least the ones that are worth reviewing, because I am a man who values his time dearly, and if I'm going to be wasting that time of mine, I want to know that I'm doing it efficiently.
Obviously, we gotta begin with the one that started it all, the Wordle. It's so elegant, so simple, so effective. The fundamental design flaws, and I assure you they exist, but they only surface when people start taking it seriously and it becomes competitive. When you begin thinking about score in Wordle, there are always two paths you can go down. Either least guesses or fastest time. Personally, I think least guesses is the one best aligned with the intrinsic goal of Wordle by default. After all, you are always limited in your guesses, but there's never really a time limit imposed upon you in the original game, other than the clock striking midnight, I suppose. However, if your goal is to make an exciting competition out of a Wordle 1v1 for whatever reason, I have to admit that fastest time would be a more entertaining show. Not only because this encourages both players to play faster, which leads to more high-octane gameplay, as well as leaves room for blunders, which are always exciting in competition, but also because this allows for different strategies to flourish. For instance, one player might find it more effective to use their early guesses as quickly as possible in order to reveal the most amount of letters, whilst the other might try to perform each guess as a genuine shot at the answer. If the winning criteria was least guesses, then the first strategy would be completely ineffective, but with fastest time, both are valid strategies. Wordle does actually have a semi-official ruling on this built directly into the website, the hard mode setting, which effectively forces the user to play in a way that optimizes for the least guesses criteria. As I said, this makes perfect sense since this version is way more aligned with how Wordle was, I guess, meant to be played, but I do think that if anyone is looking to hold a competition that's as exciting and entertaining as Wordle can allow, then a fastest time win condition with the hard mode setting turned off in order to allow for strategic variety is the way to go. That being said, I obviously play my Wordle with hard mode on, taking my sweet old time, accepting that my score, when played this way, is almost entirely dependent on my starting word, which is almost entirely luck-based, let's be honest. Now, of course, there are certain words which are way better starters than others, but that's purely based on statistical probability, and the actual best starting word for any given day would be whichever word is the answer on that day, right? And beyond trying to optimize your starting word, the only further skill that you can demonstrate is knowing the kind of words that the puzzle masters are more likely to put as the answer, which is kind of metagaming, and even that became a liability after the incident on December 19th, 2025.
And he professed and confessed to be a demon.
Now, Wordle, being the original, has spawned the most amount of direct evolutions from itself, whether that be localizations that keep the game rules exactly the same but change the pool of words that you're guessing from, or ones that keep the pool the same but expand on the rules of the guessing. Now, what I mean by changing the pool of words is usually just Wordle but in a different language, although this does also include games like Thwordle, which is themed Wordle, where the word you're trying to guess is from a particular set of vocabulary. But I think the better version of this idea is where your guesses revolve around hints related to the answer that you use to guess the idea, rather than specific letters that you use to guess the specific word. And we're gonna talk about them in further detail later on in the video, just don't worry about it. But the second category, meanwhile, the one that keeps the pool the same, consists of games like Octordle and its numerous cousins that make you guess multiple words simultaneously, all the way from 2 in Dordle to Kilordle, which is 1,000, and like just stay away from that website. Don't even. There's also all of Octordle's minigame modes, among which I find the Rescue to be the most interesting one, because in all the other modes, the optimal play is almost certainly to start with a couple words that cover the most amount of possible letters from the English alphabet, and only start actually guessing after having used up these initial tactical guesses, at which point the game becomes either trivial because you can probably one-shot every word, or it becomes a slot machine after you encounter a word that looks like this, and there are 5 different equally possible answers, and the only one that's correct is actually the 6th one where I punch a hole in my wall. Another variation that changes the rules but is ultimately just Wordle is called Alphalock. I don't particularly like Alphalock, not only for not following the agreed upon naming convention, like just call it Alphalock, it's right there, like guys, we got a whole thing going on here, okay? But also because it doesn't fix the luck-based flaws present in the original Wordle formula. You know, the starting word randomness and the slot machine situations that I talked about, but instead adds way more luck into the equation by making it so you also have to guess which letter corresponds to the hints that you get after each guess. Now I know the point is to use deduction, and you very clearly can after making a couple guesses, but when it's your first guess, it ends up just being another layer of luck that you have to deal with. Luckily, there's one more variation of the classic Wordle that I've encountered, which not only answers all of these problems, but is also definitely the most creative and original twist I've seen on the Wordle formula, while still remaining firmly a Wordle to its core. And it's called Waffle. Because your playboard looks like a waffle and it perfectly fits the agreed upon naming convention. That wasn't so hard, now was it? And the game design is even more elegant than the name design. There are 6 words that you need to assemble, and all of their letters are already present on your board, they're just shuffled around. What you have to do is put them in the correct places with as few swaps as possible. This is more multi-layered gameplay than a lot of AAA releases nowadays, people, because although it's still a word-guessing game, the score isn't directly based on your guesses, it's tied to how you input your guesses, i.e. your swaps. This leads to many situations where you might have already guessed every word correctly, but you don't actually have enough remaining swaps to put it because you wasted your previous ones or something. And even more interesting is that every swap you make naturally affects the position of 2 different letters, which means you can actually get information about multiple words with a single swap if you're being smart with the letters you choose to move around. This design not only solves the randomness that comes with selecting your starting word by removing the concept of a starting word as a whole, but it also ends up completely eliminating the slot machine problem. Because if you encounter something like this, whichever letter belongs to that slot has to be one that's already present on the board. And if there happen to be multiple possibilities present on the board, you can just ignore that word until you find the remaining ones, and whichever letter is left over will be the correct one. The Waffle is genuinely the most clever version of the Wordle formula that I've ever encountered, and I think it might be as good as the Wordle formula can get before it evolves into something else entirely. Like, if you like the Wordle, go play Waffle. However, the legacy that Wordle spawned isn't just daily word-based games, it's any sort of more or less trivia-based web games, and this is where we start getting into the truly unique and interesting dolls. Our first foray into this world is through Lexicle. This is probably the most Wordle-esque of the non-Wordle clones, given that it's a puzzle that is still purely linguistic in nature, but now we're not just talking about how words are written, we're also talking about their meanings. In Lexicle, you are given a starting word that's vaguely related to the hidden word in one way or another. And through guesses of exclusively 5-letter words, because Wordle standard, I guess, you need to figure out which word is the one that you're looking for by playing hot and cold with their meanings. It's a pretty fun exercise in exploring the different meanings a word can have, I guess, but its biggest flaw is definitely the fact that hotness and coldness, and I'm doing air quotes here, are very much not something you can objectively measure between words. This leads to many situations where the hidden word feels like it's much closer to a word that the game considers warm instead of one that it considers hot. I mean, how are we putting crazy all the way down to warm when the hidden word is literally craze? Like, we're not being serious here. It's literally 1 letter off, and it's not by coincidence, but by etymological design. Like, it's the same word, both in its noun and adjective forms. How's that colder than motherfucking Vogue? Also, they have an archive feature, which I think every good doll should, but they only let you go back up to the 1st of the month if you don't have an account. And, I mean, the account creation is free, but I'm a certified account creation hater, so I will not be doing this. The worst part is, yes, I said 1st of the month instead of a month back, which I think is very silly, because if I have to miss a week of puzzles because I'm on vacation or something and want to knock them out when I return, I can do that perfectly fine, unless if that week just happens to be the last week of the month. Like, why make it arbitrary? Just let me go back up to 30 days ago, and you can ask me for an account for the rest, that's fine, but like, I just find it silly that it's specifically the 1st of the current month. Because you know who does let me do exactly that? Revealed, which is the second Britannica game that we're talking about. The first one was Octordle, but that was just a Wordle copy, whilst Revealed is actually a really original concept. And Britannica is the perfect entity to be running it. That's because every day you get an excerpt from a random page on the Britannica Encyclopedia with a bunch of the key pieces of information cosplaying the pedophile, I mean, just being censored, black bars on it. You also get a hint about the general topic at hand, person, place, history, etc., whatever, and your goal is to guess what the article is about while revealing as little of it as possible. And let me tell you, this is without a doubt the best doll we've talked about so far. Not only is it the one that feels the closest to binary cocaine when you one-shot the answer with 0 reveals purely off the letters and trying to fill in the gaps in the text in your mind, but it also doesn't have any major design flaws in its gameplay. It offers both a challenge in trivia and strategy through the spaces you choose to reveal, because like if the category is a person, you can figure out which censor bar is the one covering their profession, or the one that might reveal their best known work if you think they're an artist, or their nationality if you suspect they're a historical figure or whatever. And if it's a plant, you can choose to reveal the Latin name for its genus if you're goated and speak Latin, or more realistically entirely avoid touching it because you don't in fact speak Latin. The selected pages are also very well curated, given that it's very rare that I come across an answer where I just didn't know what it was. And 90% of the time where that does happen, it was because it was an answer based around Western culture, like an American radio host or a famous rugby field. I show examples, but as I said, the archive only goes back up to a month, but you're gonna have to take my word for it on this one. And although I don't like it when I'm penalized in my daily puzzles for the simple fact of not living in the land of the free, Britannica does do a pretty good job of making almost all of its topics actual general knowledge instead of general American knowledge most of the time. And just to be clear, because this might be confusing because it was for me, Britannica, despite being literally called Britannica, is in fact US published and has been for over a century. It's just called that because it was founded in Scotland. Yeah, it's not even English.
Scotland forever!
Alright, there's a bit of a complicated one coming up, so let me get through some simple ones first before I go on to try and explain that one. Disorderly tells you exactly what it wants you to do every single day in the name of the puzzle. Sort these whatevers by their given criteria. Sometimes it's very fun, other times it's sports related. In either case, it usually takes no more than a couple minutes to solve, and as hard as it is to one-shot, when you do, you feel like the unstoppable god emperor of mankind. Musical lets you pick a genre of your choice, I'm a rock eater personally, and gives you snippets from 3 random popular songs in that genre. For each snippet, you need to pick between one of 4 possible albums that it's from. Guess all of them correctly, and you get invited to the next Beatles live show. Framed and episode both give you a screenshot from a movie or TV show respectively, and you try to guess where it's from. Doesn't get much simpler than that. I'm also excruciatingly bad at it, so this one's recommended for cinephiles only. Scrandle is a very weird one because you're not actually trying to find the correct answer because there is no correct answer. You're just trying to guess what the majority of other people think is the correct answer, even if you yourself disagree with it. Just remember that fries are valued way higher than you might think, unless if you think that fries are valued very highly, in which case it might be slightly lower. And also, 2 times the price is not a deterrent when the food looks 2 times as yummy. And finally, you want to talk about America-centric dolls? Take a wild guess as to what Costco doll might possibly be. This is the one that I said was complicated, but like many other things in this life that are complicated, it's actually very straightforward once you understand it. It's just significantly more complicated to explain than just saying, oh yeah, guess the 5-letter word. In Raddle, you need to follow a series of clues that will lead you from one word to another, but you don't know the order in which the clues need to be followed. Also, you can do it backwards. I realize that might not be very clarifying if you've never heard of Raddle, but that's the best way I can describe it, honestly. Just like look at the screen and see what I'm doing and try to understand, or just like open a new tab right now and give it a shot yourself. Honestly, there's nothing stopping you. Raddle is very unique as far as dulls go. It might even be the least dull-like dull out of them all. It feels like an actual old-school newspaper puzzle, and you could actually make Raddle work as a physical puzzle. There's nothing in the design that requires an interactive website, except the hints, I guess, but that's obviously not integral to the gameplay. This is contrary to almost every other dull that's built on receiving feedback on your guesses in order to adjust your future guesses. In Raddle, if one of your guesses is incorrect, then you would quickly find yourself in a dead end that doesn't make sense with any of the clues that remain in the game, right? So it's self-correcting and you would need to backtrack. This makes Raddle one of the most stimulating dulls in the video, but it's also why I don't feel comfortable calling it the best dull definitively. Because, as I said, it feels the least dull-like dull out of them all. Like, if all of the other ones are dull-likes, then Raddle feels like a dull-light. You know, that's a gaming reference. That's a video game genre reference to all of my video gamers watching this. I appreciate you. In fact, I appreciate you so much that there's a whole section in the video I've dedicated to you. Because believe it or not, much like Wordle clones is a subgenre of the greater dull ecosphere built around guessing words using their letters, there are many other subgenres which are highly distinct from Wordle itself and yet are still firmly dull-likes. One of those genres is video game dulls, and I'm not referring to stuff like game dull that just revolves around the idea of video games as a whole. I'm referring to dulls where the entire framework of the guessing takes place within the context of a particular video game. Just some examples to illustrate: we've got LOL dull for League of Legends, Val dull, Poke dull, Smash dull, which is Smash Bros. We've got Royale dull for all the mobile gamers out there, MC dull, which is short for Minecraft dull for all of you hip with the lingo. You get the idea. Most of these follow the same structure. There are multiple categories, and the main one is usually something along the lines of guess the character. You start off with a blind guess, and much like Wordle, your starting guess is the biggest factor in how quickly you will reach the answer, but that's just the nature of the game, we gotta accept it. And then the game will give you info on how many traits your guess shares with the hidden character that you're searching for. In games like Waddle, this is usually very straightforward due to the limited variety in the traits that can be attached to each character. Meanwhile, in Pokédoll, getting the answer might take about a dozen guesses, and that's with the pool limited to only Gen 1. Imagine if they had all of them. Overall, these dolls are pretty fun if you already play the game and your brain happens to be filled with this information and you just want to get some more mileage out of the memory space that you feel like is being wasted on the ability to name over 1,000 different fictional animal species. Although you have to keep in mind that some games are far better suited to being dullified than others. A good rule of thumb is to stay away from any dolls for games that don't have characters, because then you really start scraping the bottom of the barrel. I'm looking at you, CS doll. Guessing a pro player is not as interesting as you might think. You should, like, if you're watching this, if CS doll people are watching this, which I don't think they are, but if they are, then you should just steal Rankdall's idea and integrate it into your own website as one of the categories, just like Waddle did. But I don't even play Counter-Strike, so I don't really care. I should also take this opportunity to mention one called Pokédoku, which, if the name didn't give it away, is Pokemon Sudoku. And if I have to explain what either Pokemon or Sudoku is to you, then you're watching the wrong video, buddy. I'm sorry to tell you. Now, Pokédoku is interesting because although it is firmly within the video game subgenre of dolls, obviously, it's also a Sudoku-style doll, which I will still consider dolls for the sake of this video as long as it revolves around trivia instead of just numbers in a square. But it might be a stretch to call this a Sudoku-style doll, as if Sudoku-style were a whole genre, but there is at least one other that I know which functions in the exact same way, and it's called GeoGrid, which ties us nicely to our next genre, geography dolls. Now, full disclosure, this is probably my favorite genre, and there are a lot of them that I want to talk about, but let me tell you how GeoGrid works first before I get carried away. Basically, the entire game takes place within this 3x3 grid, like a Sudoku of some sort. And your goal is to fill each square with an answer that fulfills both of the criteria given by its corresponding row and column. Extrapolating this to the entire grid, the game asks you to find 9 different answers, no duplicates, all of which have to meet a different combination of 2 conditions. But that's not all, because there's an additional layer in both of these games that elevate them leagues above what they would have been otherwise. Each correct answer has an associated rarity with it. This corresponds to the percentage of players who have given that answer for that particular square before you. So your secondary goal, beyond just completing the grid, becomes completing the grid with the rarest answers you can think of. This leads to a lot more strategy than just writing down the first answer that comes to mind, since it's not uncommon for some squares to have over 20 valid answers in both of the games, and you would have to think which one is the one that the least amount of people guessed, which usually means that you have to think of all of the answers before you reach the rarest one, because, you know, it's the rarest one. And I think GeoGrid does this way better than Pokédoku, because let me tell you, when you get that legendary country and see that bright red light up on your screen, ooh, heroin wishes it could compare. Now, as I said, there might be other Sudoku-style dolls out there, like GeoGrid and Pokédoku, that I'm just not aware of, but it's kind of hard to search for this stuff efficiently, so, you know, let me know in the comments if you know any good ones that fit this style of design, so we can decide if Sudoku-style doll is an actual genre, or if it's just these two. In any case, GeoGrid is just one of many, many geography-themed dolls. There are simple ones, like Flaggle, where you try to guess a flag every day, and if you're not playing in hard mode, it becomes completely trivial, because you can just browse the flags like a monthly Club Penguin catalog. Like, you don't even need to know any flags, which I feel like should be necessary for a game called Flaggle, but I digress. There's also Global, which is more of a test of your triangulation skills than a test of your geography knowledge, but I guess it's good for people who aren't that good at geography and would actually have trouble naming any country on the map that you would point to. There's also Control, which feels like the natural progression from Global that you switch to once you've graduated from that level, and then there comes Wordle, which is where you actually get into the proper geography dolls. Wordle gives you a silhouette of a country that you have to guess, but that's only the intro. Once you actually find the country of the day, there are 12 more rounds where you try to guess things all about that country, all the way from its capital to its GDP per capita. And if you've had your fill of trivia, you can move on to WhenTaken, where you can put your knowledge to the test by guessing the country solely based off of a single picture. And this picture is not taken from Google Street View, so you can't look at the ballers to metagame your filthy GeoGuessr sweats. Also, there are US-specific versions of both of these called Statel and WhenTaken USA, because unfortunately everyone knows that the average American couldn't even spell the Philippines, let alone point to it on a map. No offense all of you who can. And if you don't care about the cultural or general trivia aspect of geography and are just purely interested in the map aspect of it all, you're going to love Travel. That's the name of the game. I'm not telling you to go on a vacation. It's spelled like the L and the... Travel gives you a starting point and an ending point and asks you to connect the two using the fewest countries possible. Obviously, doing so requires you to have well enough knowledge of the geographic area to be able to tell exactly which country touches which, and in many cases, finding the shortest route requires you to be able to map out the entire route in your head before you even enter your first country. And if you find yourself regularly one-shotting the shortest route and these childish games bore you, try out the hard mode, which enforces a specific limitation on you, like finding the shortest path without touching a specific country. I've even seen hard mode days where the game completely forgot about countries altogether and asked me to connect two bodies of water, like, how do I go from the Indian Ocean to the Black Sea? Like, I don't fucking know, you tell me! Alternatively, if you pride yourself on your local expertise, you can browse the various versions of the exact same game shrunken down to the size of a single country, or region sometimes. Perfect if you're feeling in a particularly Chinese mood, and horrible if you happen to be German, because seriously, if there are any Germans watching this, like, I need to know, would anyone be able to one-shot this? Like, what? This seems crazy to me, like, what? Finally, there's one dull that I've yet to mention, which is the ultimate test of global geography, cultural knowledge, world history, and critical thinking. Do one dull to rule them all and prove to your friends, once and for all, that you are the biggest culture maxing knowledge cell. This is WhenTaken. Created by the same people behind GeoGrid, Wordle, WhenTaken, Travel, and more, including a worse version of the flaggle that I showed, WhenTaken consists of 5 rounds. Each round, you are given a single picture, just like in WhenTaken, but you need to not only guess the country, but the specific location as closely as possible, like in GeoGuessr. But, unlike GeoGuessr, you also need to place the picture in time, anywhere between today and the year 1860, almost 2 centuries apart. For each round, you can collect up to 200 points, 100 from your geographic proximity and 100 from your temporal proximity, for a total of 1000 points each day. And unlike most of the other dulls, there is no one-shotting the WhenTaken. You will not be getting a score of 1000, maybe ever, in your lifetime. This means you will forever be chasing a higher score, getting ever closer to a perfect day but never reaching it, because do you understand what that would entail? Not only guessing the exact year in which every single photo was taken, but also the location down to the neighborhood, because 1 point off is all it takes to not get that perfect score. No matter how well you know car models, what guarantee do you have that that 2009 Toyota Corolla isn't actually a very well-maintained car from 12 years ago? No matter how well you know South American forests, just a couple kilometers off and you might as well never even have tried. WhenTaken will break you, it will test your resolve, and it will beat you up until you bleed from every orifice and leave you alone in a dark alley to be nibbled on by rats. And in the end, you're going to say, thank you. Thank you, WhenTaken, for making me stronger, for teaching me the awareness to always expect the unexpected, for teaching me the humility to be able to doubt myself, for teaching me the confidence to be able to disregard the fools that surround me.
China.
It's not China, look at it, dude.
And one day, maybe next week, maybe next year, maybe in another life, you will eventually find yourself staring at the results screen, all 4 digits of your perfect score looking back at you, in your desperate solitude, surrounded by no one to share your glory with.